Well, good morning. My name is Brandon Viers. I'm a civil engineer with the Natural Resources Conservation Service. I'm located in Columbia, Missouri. I'm going to talk a little bit about our primary tool that we have for flood recovery assistance, or recovery assistance, excuse me, and that is the Emergency Watershed Protection Program. Before I get started into my presentation here, I do want to recognize Chris Rader. She is the district conservationist here for the FOSA. Thanks, Chris. So she's your local point of contact. Also need to recognize the program manager for the Emergency Watershed Protection Program. That is Marty Comstock. He's a state engineer. He's my boss. He couldn't be here. He had prior engagements, so he sent me in his place. So I'll try to do the best I can. If you look at the picture up there on the left side, I wanted to highlight this since we're up in this part of Missouri. We did a exigency project, which means there's an imminent threat to life and property. We typically don't have exigencies. Usually we were just doing a regular EWP, if you will, recovery assistance. But this particular one did pose an imminent threat. This is up on the Little Tarkio River near the town of Fortescue. Maybe you all, I hope you're familiar with that location. The levee breach there on the left-hand side of the photo from Missouri River floodwaters. And that breach in that levee then was directing water directly at that second levee there on the right-hand side. Eroding that levee away, and we were able to come in with the sponsors requested assistance. We came in and added a bunch of rock riprap and built that levee and protected that levee, which in turn saved the town of Fortescue and several farmsteads and valuable crop ground as well. So just wanted to highlight that's one of the things that we actually did accomplish. Again, I'm talking about the EWP program, our Emergency Watershed Protection Program. I'll commonly, the recovery assistance that we offer, I'll refer to that as the EWP program, so sorry for all the acronyms. Like Corey said, we have a lot of them in the federal government, but the EWP program, the Recovery Assistance Program, is our primary, as I said earlier, primary recovery assistance program. It can be activated in natural disasters of several types, including earthquakes, windstorms, drought, fire, tornadoes, and of course the reason we're all here, floods. That particular program has to be conducted through a sponsor. We cannot work directly with the landowner on the EWP program. So you have to get a sponsor to help you out if you have a need for repairs. On the other hand of that, the floodplain easements program, though, we do work directly with the sponsor, or excuse me, with the landowner on these programs. I'll go into a little more detail about the floodplain easement program later. Primarily, I'm going to focus on the recovery assistance, or the EWP program at this time. Of course, the recovery measures must reduce threats to life or property. And it must be economically, environmentally, and socially defensible. I'll go into a little more detail about that later. And as I've already said, recovery assistance must be through eligible project sponsors. Your typical repairs include with flood recovery, of course, levee repair. They have to be non-federal, non-U.S. Army Corps of Engineers eligible levees or non-FEMA levees. We can also do sediment removal from drainage ditches, from primary ditches. They have to drain more than one property. They can't just drain your property. We can do stream bank stabilization, as I pointed out there at Fortescue, near roads, bridges, and buildings. Usually we can't just do stream bank stabilization on a location on the river. There usually has to be some other infrastructure in place that we're trying to help protect. The reason being we have to have an economically viable project. Our benefits must outweigh the cost of the repairs. So that's why we usually have to have a bridge or a road or something near the stream to help protect. And then also we can do log jam removal from channels, either natural or constructed channels. Eligible sponsors include state governments, cities, towns, municipal authorities. Primarily the ones we're working with are going to be the drainage, levee districts, and the county commissioners. Sponsor responsibilities, including making applications for EWP assistance. Typically that happens within 60 days of a disaster being declared. Last year's flood lasted forever, as you all are certainly aware. I think finally they determined that the flood was completed in this middle of December, I think. So we have waived that 60-day time period because the flooding lasted so long, and we just couldn't even get out to see the site. So the sponsor has to obtain the land rights. secure any permits that are needed, provide design services. We have optional there in parentheses. On smaller, less involved projects, NRCS will help provide design services, but on the larger dollar value ones, we ask that the sponsors provide that design service. Yes, Chris?
They still put in requests for assistance now?
Yes, I was going to get to that. We are still accepting late requests for assistance because, like I said, we've just now got done with flooding, so yeah, we're still taking applications. Administer local contracts for repairs, so the sponsor's going to have to secure a contractor through bidding process, or they can use their own forces. And then, as with all government programs, it seems, we have a cost share portion that the sponsor must contribute at least 25% toward the project, and NRCS covers 75%. And then complete the post-project operation and maintenance. So. Eligible measures, again, they must reduce threat to life or property, provide protection from additional flooding or erosion, remove debris that affects runoff or erosion, restore hydraulic capacity to channels, clean out channels. Disposal of animal carcasses, when carcasses meet the definition of debris. I think maybe Nebraska did some of this. I don't know that we've ever done any of that. Repair of damage to watershed structures, flood control structures that NRCS has put in over the years. And again, they must be economically, socially, and environmentally defensible and technically sound. Again, I highlighted on that, the benefits must outweigh the costs. That's the economic part of that. Environmentally defensible, we have to check to make sure there aren't any, for example, threatened and endangered species. We're not going to put in a recovery measure that's going to impact those species. And technically sound, we can't just throw, in the instance of a levee repair, let's say, we can't just put the levee right back on the bank. We need to have a setback so that we have some buffer there so that we won't lose a levee again, hopefully. Non-eligible measures, we can't provide assistance on federal lands, federal highways. We cannot repair the same structure more than 2 times in 10 years. Performing normal O&M activities, we're doing a lot of sediment removal. If that sediment was deposited there just over years from erosion or whatever, we can't cost share on that. If it was deposited there by the flood, though, we certainly can. So, correcting pre-disaster damage, I just hit on that point, and repairing transportation facilities. I can't repair roads, bridges, etc. We can protect, but we can't repair. And then repairing levees on channels with more than 400 square miles of drainage area or systems in the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers program. Excuse me. We did get a waiver on this. We can assist for on levees that are greater than that 400 square mile drainage for the 2019 flood. And of course, we can't increase capacity or protection level. We can't dig the ditch out deeper and wider. We can't raise the levee higher than it was before. So. Performance time, the exigent situations like the one at Fortescue, loss of life of property is imminent. And we do go through an expedited application and approval process. We have a whole 10 days to complete the work from funding. Non-exigent, which is the majority of what our work is, the threat to life of property is not imminent, and we have 220 days to complete the work from once the funding is secured. A little bit of a kind of a step-by-step here of the EWP assistance process. Of course, we have to have the disaster declaration and the emergency watershed protection program is activated. We will coordinate with FEMA and other partners to see who's going to be the responsible party for assisting. And then if it's determined that it's NRCS, the sponsor makes a request. As Chris highlighted, we are still accepting late requests. Excuse me. To date, from the 2019 flood, we've received 132 requests for assistance. And then we'll go out, NRCS will go out and do a damage survey report. That is a report to assess the damage, obviously, and what we think it's going to take to repair that damage, how much property and everything that's impacted by this damage. To date, we have approved and funded 128 DSRs. And then, of course, funding is allocated for the DSR through Washington, D.C., and we're almost at 35 million in approved funding at this point. We're expecting about another 30 DSRs because, as I've said before, we haven't quite got through all the flooding yet, so we can't access the sites. We're expecting approximately $3 million extra dollars requests for that. So, and then, of course, we have the cooperative agreement with the sponsor, which we are actively and diligently working on those as we speak. The sponsor has to get plans, permits, and land rights approved. Of course, then you hire your contractor, the work is completed, and then the sponsor is reimbursed for those costs. So that's kind of where we're at. We do have a few agreements in place now. We have had some work being completed, or at least started, in some of our earlier counties that we were able to access. So now, I said that was the recovery program that we have to do through a sponsor. Now I'm going to talk about the floodplain easements that we can do with the individual landowner. Of course, floodplain easement is a voluntary perpetual easement. It's an easement that's forever. It's purchased by the federal government and held by USDA, and the landowner gets a one-time easement payment. The landowner still retains fee title and rights to the ground. Just because it has a public easement on it doesn't mean the public can have access to it. But you're basically limited to your recreational use of the land. You can't develop it. Obviously can't plant crops on it for a profit. Basically it's just there for rec ground. Eligible land or floodplain lands damaged by flooding once in the previous calendar year, or floodplain lands damaged by flooding twice in the previous 10 years. And the land must be privately owned or through a state or local government. Restoration of floodplain easements will include all the necessary conservation practices required to restore the floodplain functions of the site. So we want to let it interact again with the river, you know, tie it all back, not take down the levee in certain places, and let it interact with the river. And then NRCS may pay up to 100% of that restoration cost. Landowners receive the lowest of one of the three values for their ground: fair market value, corresponding geographical rate established by NRCS, and then an offer made by landowner. One lesser of those three is what we'll accept. And that's all I have. I do have a couple of handouts up here that you can come and get later if you're interested in either one of the programs. And thank you.